Four friends. Mark, the daredevil with a wild streak. Emily, the skeptic with a sharp tongue. Lisa, the timid one with a heart of gold. Tom, the quiet observer with an analytical mind. They craved thrills, chased adrenaline, always seeking the next big adventure. Tonight their target, Black Hollow, an ancient mansion shrouded in mystery. A house whispered of in hushed tones where secrets and shadows danced. A place of legend, fear and darkness, where the past never truly died.
"Dare you all to enter," Mark declared, his voice dripping with challenge.
Mark challenged, a glint in his eye, daring anyone to back down. Emily scoffed, but a shiver danced down her spine, betraying her bravado. Lisa paled, clutching Tom's arm, her fear palpable. He remained stoic, gaze fixed on the looming silhouette against the moonlit sky. Black Hollow awaited, its secrets locked within. The dare hung heavy in the air, as tangible as the approaching storm clouds, thick with foreboding. They all knew the stories, the tales of terror. They all felt the fear, a cold hand gripping their hearts. Yet the thrill of the unknown, the allure of the forbidden, drew them closer like moths to a flame. Tonight they would tempt fate, challenge the darkness. Unseen eyes watched from the shadows. The house seemed to breathe with malevolent intent, its walls whispering secrets. The air grew colder, the wind howled, and the house creaked as if alive, its very essence filled with dread. Their hearts pounded, fear gripping them tighter with each step, the weight of the unknown pressing down. A sudden warning echoed in their minds, urging them to turn back, a primal instinct for survival. They paused, the weight of the dare pressing down on them. The house still untouched, its dark secrets waiting to be unveiled. Mark's voice echoed in their minds. The dare not just a challenge, but a test of courage, a rite of passage. Each of them had something to prove, to themselves and to each other. The dare was more than just a thrill, it was a measure of their bravery. With a collective breath, they steeled themselves, ready to face whatever lay within Black Hollow. Pause 3S. The group huddled together, the night air chilling their bones as they gathered their courage. Mark's face was set in a determined scowl, his bravado unshaken. Emily, despite her skepticism, couldn't hide the flicker of fear in her eyes. Lisa clung to Tom, her trembling hands betraying her anxiety, while Tom's stoic expression showed a hint of concern. Mark broke the silence. "You all know the stories, right? They say Old Man Black's ghost still roams the halls. They say he was a madman obsessed with dark rituals." Emily rolled her eyes, though her voice wavered slightly. "Come on, Mark. Ghosts? Really? It's just an old house, but the rumors about people disappearing, those are harder to ignore." Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "I heard that anyone who enters never comes out the same. They say the house, it changes you." Tom, ever the analytical one, spoke up. There's no scientific basis for any of these claims, but he paused. "There's something unsettling about this place, the architecture, the history. It's also deliberately ominous." Mark smirked, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, if we don't come out the same, at least we'll have a good story to tell, right?" The group shared a nervous laugh, but the tension was palpable. Each of them could feel the weight of the dare pressing down, the house's malevolent presence looming over them. Emily sighed. "All right, let's get this over with, but if we see anything weird, we're out. Deal?" Mark nodded, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Deal, let's show this house what we're made of." Lisa took a deep breath, her grip on Tom's arm tightening. "I just hope we don't regret this." Tom glanced at the house, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky. The facade was a chilling sight. Cracked windows like hollow eyes, ivy creeping up the walls like skeletal fingers, and the front door hanging ajar, as if inviting them into its maw. "Whatever happens, we stick together." "Agreed?" They all nodded, a silent pact forged in the face of the unknown. With one last look at each other, they turned towards Black Hollow, ready to face whatever lay within. Pause 3S. The stage was set. The players prepared. The house waited, its dark secrets eager to be unveiled. Pause 3S. The group hesitated at the entrance of Black Hollow House, feeling the weight of its dark history pressing down on them. The air seemed thicker here, every breath a struggle, as if the house itself was trying to suffocate their resolve. Mark, usually the first to jump into any challenge, found himself pausing, his hand hovering just inches from the tarnished doorknob. He glanced back at his friends, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. Pause 2S. Emily's eyes darted around, catching unsettling shadows that seemed to dance just out of sight. The wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying with it faint, almost inaudible murmurs that sent shivers down her spine. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the old house. Pause 2S. Lisa clung to Tom, her grip tightening with every creak and groan. She could feel the house's malevolent presence as though it were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. "This place, it feels wrong," she said, her voice trembling. Pause 2. Tom, ever the rational one, tried to steady his breathing. "It's just an old house," he muttered, more to convince himself than anyone else. But even he couldn't deny the unsettling atmosphere that surrounded them. The architecture, the history, it all seemed deliberately designed to instill fear. Pause 2S. Just then, a sudden loud bang echoed from within the house, causing them all to jump. Mark's hand finally grasped the doorknob, turning it slowly. "All right, this is it," he said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "Let's see what this place has in store for us." Pause 2S. With a final collective breath, they pushed the door open, stepping into the unknown. The house welcomed them with a chilling silence, its dark secrets eager to be unveiled. As they stepped inside, an old dusty sign caught their eye. The faded letters read, "Beware all who enter, for the shadows here are alive." The walls seemed to whisper warnings, the shadows moving as if they had a life of their own. "This place has seen horrors beyond imagination," Mark murmured, recalling the tales of those who had entered and never returned. The stories spoke of restless spirits, of malevolent forces that thrived on fear and despair. "We need to stay together," Emily said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "Whatever happens, we face it as one." With a shared sense of dread and determination, they ventured deeper into the house, unaware of the true horrors that awaited them. Pause 3S. As the group ventured further into the dimly lit corridor, Emily's foot struck something solid. She looked down to see an old, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and cracked with age. "Hey, look at this," she said, picking it up and blowing off a thick layer of dust. The others gathered around her, curiosity piqued. Pause 2S. Mark opened the journal carefully, the brittle pages crackling under his touch. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant yet hurried, with ink that had faded to a dull brown. "It looks like someone's diary," he murmured, flipping through the pages. "Maybe it can tell us more about this place." Pause 2S. Lisa pointed to an entry that caught her eye. "Read this one," she urged. Mark began to read aloud, his voice echoing in the eerie silence of the house. June 12, 1893. Another visitor arrived today. They seemed eager to explore the house, unaware of the dangers that lurk within these walls. I tried to warn them, but my words fell on deaf ears. The shadows have grown restless, whispering secrets and lies. I fear they will not leave this place alive. Pause 2S. Tom shivered. "That doesn't sound good," he said, his voice tinged with unease. Emily flipped to another page, her eyes widening as she read silently before speaking. July 5th, 1893. The house has claimed another soul. The visitors' screams echoed through the halls, a chilling reminder of the power that resides here. Their body was never found, swallowed by the darkness. I can feel the house's malevolence growing stronger with each passing day. It feeds on fear and despair, trapping those who dare to enter. Pause 2S. Mark closed the journal with a shudder. This place. It's more than just an old house. It's a trap designed to lure people in and never let them go. Lisa's grip on Tom tightened. "We need to be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't let it get to us." Pause 2S. With a renewed sense of dread, the group continued their exploration, the journal's ominous words echoing in their minds. The house seemed to watch their every move, its dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. As they moved deeper into the house, the air grew colder, the shadows longer. The journal had given them a glimpse into the horrors that awaited, but nothing could prepare them for what they were about to face. The house's malevolent presence was palpable, a living entity that thrived on their fear. They could feel it closing in, ready to claim them as it had so many before. Pause 2S. Stay together, Mark urged, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. We need to stay strong. With a collective breath, they pressed on, unaware of the true horrors that awaited them in the heart of Black Hollow House. Pause 3S. As the group moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing in the desolate silence, they suddenly heard a faint rustling sound. They turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, cloaked in an old, tattered robe. The figure's face was obscured by the hood, casting an aura of mystery and unease. Pause 2S. Who are you? Mark demanded, his voice trembling slightly. The figure raised a hand, palm out, as if to calm them. Pause 2S. You must leave this place, the figure intoned, their voice a haunting whisper that seemed to echo through the halls. This house is a trap, a prison for those who dare to enter. Turn back now before it's too late. Pause 2S. Lisa stepped forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. Why should we trust you? She asked, her voice steady but her eyes wide with apprehension. The figure sighed, a sound filled with centuries of sorrow and regret. Pause 2S. I was once like you, the figure replied, curious, eager to uncover the secrets of Black Hollow House. But the house claimed me, as it will claim you, if you do not heed my warning. Pause 2S. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean, claimed? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure lowered their head, the shadows growing darker around them. Pause 2S. The house feeds on fear and despair, the figure explained. It draws you in with promises of discovery, only to trap you within its walls. Many have tried to escape, but none have succeeded. Their souls are bound to this place, forever lost in the darkness. Pause 2S. Tom clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. We can't just leave without knowing the truth, he insisted. We have to find out what happened here. The figure shook their head slowly, a gesture of both pity and warning. Pause 2S. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, the figure said. It has led many to their doom, but if you must stay, know this, the house will test you, break you and consume you. Only the strongest can hope to survive. With that, the figure began to fade back into the shadows, their final words lingering in the air like a chilling prophecy. Pause 2S. Remember, the house is always watching. Pause 2S. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of the figure's warning pressing down on them. Fear and curiosity warred within their hearts, each battling for dominance. With a deep breath, Mark turned to the others, his resolve hardening. Pause 2S. We came here for answers, he said firmly, and we won't leave until we find them. The others nodded, their fear momentarily pushed aside by a shared determination. Pause 2S. Together they pressed on, deeper into the heart of Black Hollow House, unaware of the true horrors that awaited them. Pause 3S. With the mysterious figure's warning still echoing in their minds, the group ventured further into the depths of Black Hollow House. Each step they took seemed to resonate with a foreboding energy, as if the house itself was aware of their every move. Pause 2S. The corridors grew narrower and more labyrinthine, the air thickening with the scent of age and decay. Their flashlights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls that seemed to dance and shift in the dim light. They stumbled upon a hidden door, its surface almost indistinguishable from the surrounding wall. Mark pressed against it, and with a creak of ancient hinges, it swung open to reveal a concealed room. Inside, they found strange artifacts. Objects that seemed out of place and time, an old rusted compass with symbols they couldn't decipher, a porcelain doll with eyes that seemed to follow their every move, and a tattered book filled with incomprehensible scribbles. Pause 2S. Lisa picked up an ornate mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished. As she gazed into it, she felt a sudden chill, as if something was watching her from the other side. Emily examined an antique clock, its hands frozen at midnight, a persistent tick-tock echoing in the silence despite its apparent disrepair. Tom discovered a dusty music box, its melody haunting and melancholic when he wound it up, filling the room with an eerie tune that seemed to seep into their very bones. Pause 2S. With every artifact they uncovered, the sense of dread grew stronger, an almost tangible presence pressing down on them. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. Their breaths became shallow, their hearts pounding in their chests as they realized the true extent of the house's sinister nature. Pause 2S. Mark's voice broke the silence, trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "We need to keep moving. There's more to this place than we can see." The others nodded, their faces pale but resolute. They knew they were delving into something far more dangerous than they had anticipated, but their curiosity and need for answers drove them onward. Pause 2S. Together they left the hidden room, the artifacts and their haunting presence lingering in their minds. They pressed deeper into the house, unaware of the further horrors that awaited them, each step drawing them closer to the heart of Black Hollow House's dark secrets. Pause 2S. As they ventured further, they stumbled upon another hidden chamber, one that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the Chamber of Malphas. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, their meanings lost to time, but their dark intent unmistakable. Flickering candles cast eerie shadows that danced across the room, illuminating a sinister-looking altar at its center. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and something far more foul, a stench that seemed to cling to their very souls. Pause 2S. On the altar lay ancient blood-stained ritual tools, their edges dulled by time but still exuding an aura of dread. The group could feel the weight of countless dark ceremonies that had taken place here, each one leaving an indelible mark on the room. The atmosphere was oppressive, almost suffocating, as if the very air was charged with the echoes of past horrors. Their faces reflected their horror and disbelief, yet they couldn't tear their eyes away from the macabre scene before them. Pause 2S. Cautiously, they explored the chamber, their flashlights revealing more cursed artifacts hidden in the shadows. Each item seemed to whisper of dark deeds and forbidden knowledge, their presence a testament to the room's sinister history. The flickering shadows created eerie shapes that seemed to move and shift, adding to the sense of unease that gripped them. They knew they had uncovered something truly malevolent, a place where the darkest of rituals had been performed in the name of Malphas. Pause 3S. As the group ventured deeper into the house, an unsettling sensation began to wash over them. They started hearing faint whispers, voices murmuring unintelligible words that seemed to come from the very walls. The air grew colder, and an oppressive feeling of being watched settled heavily on their shoulders. Pause 2S. Mark's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to mock their every step. Emily rubbed her temples, trying to dispel a growing headache that throbbed with each whisper she couldn't quite understand. Lisa's eyes darted around nervously, convinced she saw fleeting figures in the periphery of her vision. Tom clenched his fists, his breathing growing more labored as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Pause 2S. "Do you hear that?" Lisa finally asked, her voice trembling. The others nodded, their faces pale and strained. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls and seeping into their minds. Mark shook his head, trying to focus. "It's just the house playing tricks on us. We need to stay calm," he said, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Pause 2S. But the whispers persisted, growing more distinct. They spoke of dark secrets, of past horrors that had unfolded within these walls, urging the group to turn back before it was too late. Emily's vision blurred, and she stumbled, catching herself on a nearby wall. For a moment she saw the corridor shift, as if it were alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. Pause 2S. Tom felt a cold hand brush against his shoulder, and he spun around, finding nothing but empty air. His heart raced, and he began to doubt his own senses. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, panic rising in his voice, but Mark shook his head. "No, we need to understand what this place is hiding. We're so close." Pause 2S. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and the group felt their grip on reality slipping. Each step they took seemed to echo with the voices of the past, filling their minds with visions of ghostly figures and shadowy apparitions. They began to doubt their sanity, questioning what was real and what was just a figment of the house's dark influence. Pause 2S. Despite the mounting fear and confusion, they pressed on, driven by a desperate need for answers. The whispers continued to haunt them, a constant reminder of the house's sinister nature. They knew that whatever lay ahead would test their courage and resolve like never before. Pause 2S. As they moved forward, the whispers began to blend with distant, echoing footsteps, as if something or someone was following them, watching their every move. The line between reality and illusion blurred further, and the group's unity began to fracture under the strain. But they'd come too far to turn back now. They had to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. Pause 2S. The whispers faded into a low, haunting hum as they approached the next door, their hearts pounding in unison. With trembling hands, Mark reached for the handle, his mind swirling with vivid hallucinations. He saw the walls bleed, faces of the damned emerging from the shadows, their eyes hollow and accusing. The group watched in horror as Mark's terror became palpable, his eyes wide with fear. They knew that whatever horrors lay beyond this door, they would have to face them together. Pause 3S. The group decided to split up to cover more ground, hoping to uncover the house's dark secrets more quickly. Mark and Lisa took the left wing, while Emily and Tom ventured towards the right. The decision, though practical, left them feeling more vulnerable, the oppressive atmosphere of the house pressing down on them even harder. Pause 2S. Mark and Lisa moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing eerily through the long, empty corridors. Each creak of the floorboards sent shivers down their spines. Lisa clutched her flashlight tighter, the beam cutting through the thick darkness but revealing nothing but dust and cobwebs. "Stay close," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Pause 2S. Meanwhile, Emily and Tom proceeded with equal caution. The air seemed to grow colder with each step they took, their breaths visible in the dim light. Emily's eyes darted around, scanning for any signs of movement. "Do you feel like we're being watched?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tom nodded, his jaw clenched. "Yeah, I can't shake the feeling. Let's keep moving." Pause 2S. As they explored further, both pairs began to notice subtle signs that they were not alone. Shadows flitted at the edges of their vision, disappearing when they tried to focus on them. The whispers from earlier seemed to follow them, more insistent and mocking. Mark and Lisa found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, the feeling of unseen eyes boring into them. Pause 2S. In the right wing, Emily and Tom stumbled upon a room filled with old portraits. The eyes of the painted figures seemed to follow their every move, their expressions shifting in the flickering light. Emily's pulse quickened and she grabbed Tom's arm. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice urgent. But Tom shook his head. "No, we need to find out what's going on, just a little further." Pause 2S. Back in the left wing, Mark and Lisa discovered an old study. The room was filled with dusty books and papers, but it was the large mirror on the far wall that caught their attention. As they approached it, they saw their reflections twist and distort, as if the mirror was a portal to another realm. Lisa gasped, stepping back. "What is this place?" she whispered. Mark didn't have an answer. Pause 2S. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, more oppressive, as if the house itself was alive and aware of their every move. Mark felt a sudden chill as Lisa moved ahead, leaving him momentarily alone. The shadows seemed to close in around him, and the whispers grew louder, more distinct. He could almost make out words, taunting him, calling his name. Pause 2S. He quickened his pace to catch up with Lisa, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. For a brief moment, he thought he saw figures moving in the darkness, their forms twisted and grotesque. His heart raced, and he felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Lisa, wait!" he called out, his voice echoing back to him. As he finally caught up to Lisa, they both turned to the mirror again. This time, Mark's reflection seemed even more distorted, almost menacing. He felt a wave of nausea and fear wash over him. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. Pause 2S. The house seemed to mock his fear, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Both pairs felt the walls closing in, the air thick with malevolence. They knew they had to regroup, but the labyrinthine corridors seemed to stretch and shift, making it difficult to find their way back to each other. Pause 2S. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and the group realized that they were not just being watched, they were being hunted. The house had them in its grip, and it was not going to let go easily. With mounting dread, they pressed on, knowing that the only way to escape was to uncover the house's dark secrets and face whatever horrors lay ahead. Pause 2S. As they navigated the twisted maze of corridors, their resolve began to waver. The oppressive atmosphere gnawed at their sanity, but they knew they had to stay strong. They had to reunite and face the house's malevolent force together, or risk being consumed by its darkness forever. Pause 3S. As Emily and Tom continued their exploration, Emily's flashlight beam flickered over a section of the wall that seemed slightly different from the rest. Her curiosity piqued. She ran her fingers along the edges, feeling a subtle draft of cold air seeping through. "Tom, over here," she called softly, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Pause 2S. Tom joined her, and together they pushed against the wall. With a low groan, a hidden door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passageway leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up was colder, carrying with it a musty, almost metallic scent. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, an overwhelming sense of dread settling in her chest. "We have to see where it leads," she whispered, though every instinct screamed for her to turn back. Pause 2S. They descended the creaky wooden steps cautiously, each one protesting under their weight. The further they went, the darker it became, their flashlights barely piercing the thick gloom. The whispers from earlier seemed to grow louder, more insistent, echoing off the narrow walls. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the oppressive weight of the house's malevolence pressing down on her, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets hidden within. Pause 2S. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large, damp basement. The air was heavy with moisture and decay, and the dim light revealed rows of old wooden shelves filled with dusty jars and strange artifacts. A large, rusted metal door stood at the far end, its surface covered in strange, arcane symbols. Emily's sense of dread intensified, the whispers now almost deafening. "This place, it's not right," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Pause 2S. Tom nodded, his jaw set in grim determination. "We need to find out what's behind that door," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. With a deep breath, they approached the door, their footsteps echoing ominously in the silent basement. The house seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for them to make their move. Pause 2S. As they reached the door, Emily hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold, rusted handle. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and she could almost make out the words. Taking another deep breath, she steeled herself and grasped the handle, ready to face whatever horrors lay beyond. Pause 2S. As Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed the strange artifacts on the shelves. Some were jars filled with murky liquids, others were odd trinkets that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. Shadows danced on the walls, moving in ways that defied the light from their flashlights. She reached out to touch one of the artifacts, a small, intricately carved figurine. As her fingers brushed its surface, the symbols on the rusted door began to glow faintly, casting an eerie light across the basement. In the corner of her eye, she thought she saw a dark figure lurking, but when she turned, it was gone. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Tom nodded, his eyes wide with fear. The glowing symbols seemed to pulse in time with their racing hearts, filling the basement with an otherworldly light. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were coming from the artifacts themselves. With a final, determined look at each other, they approached the door once more. Emily's hand, now steadier, grasped the handle. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and the basement seemed to vibrate with a malevolent energy. She took a deep breath and turned the handle, ready to uncover the horrors that awaited them. Pause 3S. As Emily and Tom prepared to open the rusted metal door, Lisa, who had been exploring a different part of the basement, suddenly stopped in her tracks. A faint, almost imperceptible noise reached her ears, a soft, rhythmic tapping that seemed to beckon her. Her curiosity piqued. She followed the sound, her footsteps echoing softly in the damp, musty air. Pause 2S. The noise led her down a narrow corridor, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and cobwebs that clung to her as she passed. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, guiding her to a small, unassuming door at the end of the hall. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the tarnished brass doorknob before taking a deep breath and turning it. Pause 2S. The door creaked open to reveal a dimly lit room, its contents obscured by shadows. As Lisa stepped inside, the tapping ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press down on her. She raised her flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal rows of old dusty photographs hanging on the walls. Each one was carefully framed, though the glass was cracked and the images within were faded and yellowed with age. Pause 2S. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she moved closer to inspect them. The photographs depicted scenes of a bygone era, family gatherings, children playing, stern-faced individuals posing for portraits. But the further she looked, the more unsettling the images became. Faces began to appear distorted, eyes seemingly hollow and lifeless. Some photographs showed people in various states of distress, their expressions frozen in silent screams or twisted in agony. One photograph in particular caught Lisa's eye. It was larger than the others and positioned in the center of the room, as if it held some special significance. The image showed a group of people standing in front of a black hollow house, their faces obscured by shadows. As she leaned in closer, she noticed something strange. The shadows seemed to move, shifting slightly as if alive. A chill ran down her spine and she stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. Pause 2S. Suddenly, a soft whisper filled the room, barely audible but unmistakable. "Help us," it seemed to say, the voice filled with despair. Lisa's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the room for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The photographs seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, their subjects' eyes following her every move. Pause 2S. The air grew colder, and Lisa could feel a presence, as if the room itself was watching her. One photograph showed a ghostly figure standing behind a family, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. Lisa's hands trembled as she reached out to touch the frame, only to feel a sudden icy chill. She needed to find Emily and Tom to tell them what she had discovered. As she reached the door, she cast one last glance at the room. The haunting images burned into her memory. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, their pleas echoing in her mind. With a shiver, she turned and fled down the corridor, the oppressive weight of the house's dark history pressing down on her. Pause 2S. Little did she know, the room of haunting memories held more secrets than she could have ever imagined, and the photographs were just the beginning. The house was alive with its own malevolent will, and it had no intention of letting them go. As Lisa rejoined Emily and Tom, the whispers continued to echo in her mind, a constant reminder of the horrors they had yet to uncover. The house's dark history was ready to engulf them, and there would be no turning back. Pause 3S. As Lisa fled from the room of haunting memories, Tom found himself separated from the group, drawn by an invisible force to a different part of the house. The air grew colder with each step, the atmosphere thick with an oppressive dread. He turned a corner and found himself in a narrow hallway, the walls lined with old decaying portraits. The eyes of the painted figures seemed to follow him, their expressions twisted with malice. Pause 2S. At the end of the hallway stood an imposing door, its surface covered with strange arcane symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Tom hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest, but he knew he had to face whatever lay beyond. Gathering his courage, he reached out and pushed the door open. Pause 2S. The room beyond was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from flickering candles placed in a circle on the floor. In the center of the circle stood an old wooden chair, its surface worn and splintered. As Tom stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing ominously in the confined space. He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of fear, as if he was being watched by unseen eyes. Pause 2S. The air grew colder still, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, shifting and swirling around him. Tom's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he forced himself to move forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Pause 2S. As he reached the center of the circle, he heard a voice, low and sinister, whispering his name. "Tom," it said, the sound sending a shiver down his spine. "Welcome to your final trial." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room with its malevolent presence. Pause 2S. Tom's hands trembled as he sat down in the chair, the cold wood pressing against his skin. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing, but the voice continued, its tone growing more insistent. "You must confront your deepest fears," it said, "or be consumed by them." Pause 2S. The room seemed to shift around him. the walls closing in as the shadows grew darker. Tom's mind was filled with images of his worst nightmares, the faces of loved ones twisted in pain, the feeling of being trapped and helpless. He gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles white with tension as he fought to push the images away. "Pos 2S," the voice laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed in the confined space. "You cannot escape your fears, Tom," it said. "They are a part of you, and they will always be with you." Pause 2S. Tom felt a wave of despair wash over him, the weight of his fears threatening to crush him. But then, in the darkness, he saw a glimmer of light, a memory of a time when he had faced his fears and overcome them. He clung to that memory, using it as a shield against the darkness. "I will not be consumed," he whispered, his voice trembling but determined. "I will face my fears." Pause 2S. The shadows seemed to recoil at his words, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. Tom took a deep breath, focusing on the memory of his triumph, and the light grew stronger. The voice hissed in anger, but Tom ignored it, his resolve growing with each passing moment. He opened his eyes, the room around him now bathed in a soft, golden light. The shadows had retreated and the oppressive feeling was gone. Tom stood, his legs shaking but steady, and walked to the door. Pause 2S. As he reached for the handle, the voice spoke one last time, its tone filled with grudging respect. "You have passed the trial, Tom," it said, "but remember, your fears will always be a part of you. Do not let them consume you again." With a final deep breath, Tom opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The weight of his fears lifted but not forgotten. He knew that the house still held many dangers, but he was ready to face them, his resolve stronger than ever. Pause 2S. As Tom stepped further into the room, the mist began to swirl around him, thickening and obscuring his vision. He felt a cold hand brush against his arm, sending a jolt of fear through his body. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The voice returned, mocking him. "You think you can escape so easily?" it taunted. "Your fears are not just in your mind, they are real and they are here." The shadows began to form into shapes, eerie figures emerging from the darkness. They reached out to him, their fingers like claws, and Tom felt as if he was being pulled into the abyss. He struggled against the invisible force, his mind racing with panic. "No," he shouted, "I will not be taken." His voice echoed in the room, and for a moment, the figures hesitated. Tom seized the opportunity, breaking free from their grasp and pushing the shadows away. He focused on the memory of his past triumph, and the light within him grew stronger, pushing back the darkness. The room began to brighten, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The voice screamed in frustration, but Tom stood firm, his resolve unshaken. "I am stronger than my fears," he declared, his voice filled with newfound courage. The shadows retreated further, and the room was now filled with light. Tom knew that he had won this battle, but the war was not over. He was ready to face whatever came next, his spirit unbroken and his heart filled with determination. Pause 3S. As Tom emerged from his final trial, Emily found herself in a different part of the house, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. She wandered through the dim corridors, her footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floors. The house seemed to shift around her, the walls narrowing and expanding as if the building itself was alive and breathing. Pause 2S. Suddenly she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, her vision blurring. She reached out to steady herself against the wall, but her hand passed through it as if it were a mere illusion. Panic gripped her hard as she realized she was no longer in the house. She was in a dream, a nightmare that felt all too real. Pause 2S. The hallway around her morphed into a dark forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground beneath her feet was cold and damp, the air filled with the scent of decaying leaves. Shadows danced around her, whispering her name in hushed tones, their voices filled with malice. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled forward, trying to find a way out. Pause 2S. Every direction she turned seemed to lead her deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around her, their branches scraping against her skin. Pause 2S. The forest seemed alive with unseen creatures, their glowing eyes peering at her from the shadows. Eerie animal sounds echoed through the trees, sending chills down her spine. She felt as if the forest itself was watching her, waiting for her to make a wrong move. She tripped over an unseen root and fell to the ground, the impact jarring her senses. As she pushed herself up, she saw a figure standing in the distance, its form shrouded in darkness. The figure began to move towards her, its steps slow and deliberate. Emily's breath came in short, ragged gasps as she scrambled to her feet, the sense of dread growing stronger with each passing moment. Pause, 2S. She turned to run, but her legs felt heavy as if they were made of lead. The figure drew closer, its presence suffocating, and Emily felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder. She screamed, the sound piercing the silence of the forest, but there was no one to hear her. Pause 2S. Just as the figure reached out to grab her, Emily's eyes snapped open and she found herself back in the house, lying on the cold wooden floor. Her body was drenched in sweat, her heart racing as she struggled to catch her breath. The nightmare had felt so real. The line between reality and illusion blurred beyond recognition. Pause 2S. She sat up, her hands trembling, and looked around, the familiar surroundings of the house offering little comfort. The whispers of the forest seemed to linger in her ears, a haunting reminder of the terror she had just experienced. Pause 2S. Emily knew that the nightmare was more than just a dream. It was a manifestation of the house's malevolent power, a glimpse into the darkness that lurked within its walls. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and rose to her feet. The house was testing her, pushing her to the brink of her sanity, but she was determined not to let it break her. Pause 2S. With renewed resolve, she walked forward, ready to face whatever horrors awaited her, knowing that the line between reality and illusion would only grow thinner as they delved deeper into the heart of Black Hollow House. Pause 3S. As Emily regained her composure from her harrowing nightmare, the group pressed on, unaware of the malevolent forces that had begun to focus on Lisa. Pause 2S. The house seemed to sense her vulnerability, and a series of eerie events began to unfold around her, each more unsettling than the last. Pause 2S. Lisa felt an inexplicable chill in the air, a coldness that clung to her skin and sent shivers down her spine. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and writhe as if alive with a sinister intent. Pause 2S. She would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, only to find nothing there when she turned to look. The house was playing with her, testing her resolve, and she could feel its dark presence growing stronger. Pause 2S. As the group moved through the house, Lisa's sense of impending doom only intensified. She heard whispers that no one else seemed to notice, their voices filled with malice and foreboding. Pause 2S. The words were indistinct, but the tone was clear, a warning of the horrors that awaited her. Pause 2S. Objects around her began to move on their own, subtle at first, a picture frame tilting slightly, a candle flickering out of sync with the others. But soon the occurrences became more blatant. Pause 2S. A chair slid across the floor, a mirror cracked without warning, and once she felt a cold hand brush against her arm, though no one was there. Pause 2S. Lisa tried to shake off the growing fear, but it clung to her like a dark shroud. She couldn't escape the feeling that something terrible was about to happen and that she was the target. Pause 2S. She confided in Emily, her voice trembling as she recounted the eerie events, but Emily, still reeling from her own nightmare, could offer little comfort. Pause 2S. The group continued their exploration of Black Hollow House, unaware of the dark fate that was slowly closing in on Lisa. The house had chosen her, and its malevolent power was tightening its grip, foreshadowing the tragic events that were soon to come. Pause 2S. With each step she took, Lisa felt the weight of her impending doom grow heavier, the line between reality and the supernatural blurring with every passing moment. She knew that her time was running out and that the house would soon claim its next victim. Suddenly, a forceful gust of wind knocked her off her feet, sending her sprawling to the ground. She struggled to get up, but an unseen force pinned her down, making it impossible to move. Lisa gasped for breath as an invisible hand seemed to tighten around her throat, choking her. Her eyes widened in terror as she felt the life being drained from her body. Her vision began to fade, the world around her growing darker and colder. In a final, desperate attempt, she reached out, but her hand fell limply to the floor. The house had claimed its victim, and Lisa's lifeless body lay still, a testament to the malevolent power that resided within Black Hollow House. The group discovered her moments later, their shocked reactions echoing through the haunted halls. They mourned the loss of their friend, unaware that the house's dark hunger was far from sated. Outside, the sky darkened, and the house seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, foreshadowing the horrors yet to come. Pause 3S. As the group grappled with the horror of Lisa's demise, Tom found himself drawn to a dusty, long-forgotten corner of the house. Pause 2S. There, hidden beneath a rotting floorboard, he discovered an old leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle and yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible, as if the words had been preserved by some dark magic. Pause 2S. With trembling hands, Tom began to read, his eyes widening with each passing word. The journal belonged to the house's original owner, a man named Malthus Blackwood, who had delved into dark and forbidden rituals. Pause 2S. The entries detailed the summoning of malevolent spirits, sacrifices made in the dead of night, and the binding of souls to the very walls of the house. Pause 2S. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he realized the terrible truth. Black Hollow House was not just haunted, it was a vessel of pure evil, a prison for the damned. Pause 2S. The final entry was a chilling warning. The house hungers, and it will not rest until it has claimed all who dare to enter. Pause 2S. Tom's mind raced as he processed the implications. The house was not just a victim of dark forces, it was an active participant, drawing in the living to feed its insatiable hunger. Pause 2S. He stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the revelation. The journal's words echoed in his mind, each sentence a hammer blow to his sanity. Pause 2S. Images of Lisa's demise flashed before his eyes, and he felt a deep, gnawing guilt. Had they unknowingly walked into a trap set by the house itself? Pause 2S. His grip tightened on the journal, the leather cover creaking under the pressure. He knew he had to warn the others, but the fear of what lay ahead was almost paralyzing. Pause 2S. He knew he had to warn the others, but as he turned to leave, a cold, spectral hand gripped his shoulder, freezing him in place. Pause 2S. The air around him grew thick with malevolent energy, and he could hear the whispers of the damned, their voices filled with rage and despair. Pause 2S. With a Herculean effort, Tom broke free and stumbled back to the group, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. Pause 2S. "We have to leave," he gasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "This house, it will kill us all." Pause 2S. The group stared at him in stunned silence, the gravity of his revelation sinking in. They were not just facing ghosts. They were up against a malevolent force that would stop at nothing to claim their souls. Pause 2S. The house had already taken Lisa, and if they didn't act quickly, they would be next. The urgency of their situation was clear, and they knew that escaping Black Hollow House would be their only chance at survival. Pause 3S. The silence remains as the group realizes they are trapped. The oppressive quiet weighs heavily on their minds, amplifying their fear and anxiety. Every creak of the old house sends shivers down their spines, and the shadows seem to move with a life of their own. They must find a way to escape the house's grasp. Pause 2S. Tom, still shaken from his encounter, looks around at his friends, their faces etched with fear and determination. "We can't just sit here and wait for the house to take us," he says, his voice trembling but resolute. Pause 2S. Emily nods, clutching a makeshift weapon, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "We need a plan," she whispers, her voice barely audible over the oppressive silence. Pause 2S. Mark, his fists clenched, steps forward. "We need to find the source of the house's power," he says, his voice filled with determination. "If we can destroy it, maybe we can break free." Pause 2S. Lisa's eyes widen with a mix of hope and fear. "But how do we find it?" she asks, her voice trembling. "The house is huge, and it's filled with traps and spirits." Pause 2S. Tom takes a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We need to stick together and search every room," he says, his voice gaining strength. "We'll look for anything that seems out of place, anything that might be connected to the house's power." Pause 2S. The group exchanges determined glances, their resolve hardening. They know the risks, but they also know that staying put is not an option. With a collective nod, they begin their desperate search, each step a battle against the house's malevolent influence. Pause 2S. As they move through the dark, decaying corridors, the air grows colder, and the whispers of the damned grow louder. The house seems to pulse with a sinister energy, as if aware of their intentions. Pause 2S. Yet, despite their fear, the group presses on, driven by the hope of escape and the determination to survive. They know that time is running out, and their only chance lies in finding and destroying the source of the house's power. Pause 2S. The house may be a vessel of evil, but they are not willing to be its next victims. With every step, they move closer to the heart of Black Hollow House, ready to confront whatever darkness awaits them. Pause 3S. The group huddles in a dimly lit room, their faces a mix of fear and determination. The oppressive atmosphere of Black Hollow House weighs heavily on them, but they know they must press on. Pause 2S. Emily, clutching an old journal they found earlier, reads aloud a passage that sends chills down their spines. "The town of Black Hollow is under a curse," she says, her voice trembling. "A dark force bound to this house has plagued the town for generations." Pause 2S. Tom's eyes widen in shock. "So it's not just the house," he whispers. "The entire town is affected." Pause 2S. Mark steps forward, his expression resolute. "We have to break the curse," he declares. "It's the only way to save ourselves and the town." Pause 2S. Lisa, her voice shaking, asks the question on everyone's mind, "But how do we break it?" Pause 2S. Emily flips through the journal, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. "There must be a way," she mutters. "A ritual, a spell, something." Pause 2S. The group exchanges determined glances. They know the risks, but they also know that they can't leave the town to suffer under the curse. With a collective nod, they agree to find the means to break the curse, no matter the cost. Pause 2S. As they begin their search, the house's malevolent energy seems to intensify, as if aware of their intentions. The air grows colder and the whispers of the damned grow louder, but the group presses on, driven by the hope of freeing the town from its dark fate. Pause 2S. Each step they take brings them closer to the heart of the house and the source of the curse. They know that time is running out and their only chance lies in finding and performing the ritual to break the curse. The house may be a vessel of evil, but they are not willing to let it claim any more victims. Pause 2S. With every step, they move closer to uncovering the dark history of Black Hollow House and the curse that binds the town in shadow. The curse, they learn, was cast centuries ago by a vengeful spirit, angered by the injustices it suffered in life. This spirit, bound to the house, extends its malevolence to the entire town, causing misfortune and despair to all who reside there. Pause 2S. The group discovers ancient artifacts hidden within the house, each one a piece of the puzzle that could lead to breaking the curse. They find old relics, symbols of the spirit's wrath, and clues that point to a ritual that must be performed at the stroke of midnight. Pause 2S. Determined, they gather the necessary items for the ritual, knowing that failure is not an option. The weight of the town's fate rests on their shoulders, and they are prepared to face whatever horrors the house throws at them. Pause 2S. As the clock ticks closer to midnight, the group stands in a circle, holding hands and reciting the incantations from the journal. The air crackles with energy, and the house seems to come alive with a malevolent force, but they remain steadfast. Pause 2S. They chant the ancient words, their voices rising in unison as the house shakes and the spirit's presence becomes almost tangible. The ritual reaches its climax, and with a final desperate plea, they call upon the forces of light to banish the darkness. Pause 2S. A blinding light fills the room, and the oppressive darkness begins to lift. The spirit's hold on the house and the town weakens, and for the first time in generations, there is hope. The group, exhausted but triumphant, knows that they have succeeded in breaking the curse and freeing Black Hollow from its shadow. Pause 3S. As the group stood before Black Hollow House, its decaying grandeur loomed over them like a malevolent sentinel, casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. The house was an architectural relic, a testament to a bygone era of opulence now lost to time, with intricate carvings and ornate details barely visible beneath layers of grime and neglect. Its once grandiose columns, adorned with elaborate Corinthian capitals, were now cracked and crumbling, wrapped in a suffocating embrace of ivy and other creeping plants that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The front door, an imposing slab of weathered oak, seemed to sag on its hinges, as if burdened by the weight of countless dark secrets and the passage of time. Pause 2S. The windows, once adorned with intricate stained glass depicting scenes of myth and legend, were now shattered and covered in grime, their stories lost to the ravages of time. They resembled the hollow eyes of a long-dead giant, staring blankly into the void, as if mourning the loss of the vibrant life that once filled the house. The roof, with its broken shingles and gaping holes, sagged ominously, threatening to collapse at any moment, a testament to the relentless march of decay. A rusted weather vane, shaped like a majestic rooster, creaked with every gust of wind, adding to the symphony of decay that surrounded the house. Pause 2. The grounds surrounding the house were no less foreboding, with paths that once guided visitors now lost beneath a tangle of overgrowth. Overgrown weeds and thorny bushes choked what might have once been a pristine garden, their twisted forms casting eerie shadows in the dim light. A dilapidated fountain, its stone figures eroded beyond recognition, stood as a ghostly reminder of the house's former glory, its once sparkling waters now stagnant and dark. The air was thick with the scent of mold and rot, a pungent reminder of the house's long abandonment and the secrets it held within its walls. Pause 2. Mark, Emily, Lisa, and Tom stood transfixed, taking in every detail of the ominous facade, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding in their chests. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting for them to make the first move, its aura of menace palpable in the stillness of the evening. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lone crow, its cry echoing like a mournful lament. The group exchanged hesitant glances, the weight of the moment sinking in, each of them silently questioning their decision to come here. With a collective breath, they stepped forward, knowing that once they crossed the threshold, there would be no turning back, the house's dark history ready to engulf them. Pause 3. I bet you didn't know the true terror that lies within Black Hollow House. As they gathered their courage and approached the ominous front door, the air grew colder and the wind whispered through the trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, his presence sending shivers down their spines. The stranger's face was obscured by the hood of his weathered cloak, which was tattered and frayed at the edges, but his voice trembled with urgency. "Don't go in there," he warned, his eyes wide with fear, reflecting the dim light of the moon. "The house is cursed. Many have entered, but none have returned. The walls whisper secrets and the floors creak with the weight of lost souls. If you value your lives, turn back now," he added, his voice growing more desperate, echoing through the still night. Mark, ever the daredevil, scoffed but couldn't ignore the chill that ran down his spine, as if icy fingers were tracing his vertebrae. Emily, the skeptic, narrowed her eyes, scrutinizing the stranger's every word, her mind racing with doubt and curiosity. Lisa clutched Tom's arm even tighter, her heart racing, feeling the pulse of fear in her veins. Tom, the quiet observer, remained silent, but his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil, reflecting the flickering shadows around them. The group exchanged nervous glances, their breaths visible in the cold night air. The stranger's words hung heavy in the air, a dire omen they could not easily dismiss, like a dark cloud looming over them. They hesitated, the thrill of the unknown battling with the fear of the warning, their hearts pounding in unison. Finally, they pushed past the stranger, determined to uncover the secrets of Black Hollow House, their footsteps echoing on the cracked stone path. As they crossed the threshold, the stranger's desperate plea echoed in their minds, mingling with the creak of the ancient door. The inside of the house was filled with intricate details, from cobweb-covered chandeliers to ancient dusty portraits, each one seeming to watch their every move. But it was too late. The door creaked open and they stepped into the darkness, the air thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories, leaving the safety of the world they knew behind as the shadows of Black Hollow House enveloped them. Pause 3. As the group ventured deeper into the house, their flashlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the decaying walls. The air was thick with the scent of mold and rot, and every creak of the floorboards echoed like a ghostly whisper. In the center of a dusty, cobweb-laden room, a peculiar object caught Emily's eye. She knelt down, her fingers brushing against a small, intricately carved puzzle box. The box was cold to the touch, and a shiver ran down her spine as she felt the delicate engravings. Its surface was adorned with cryptic symbols, similar to those they had seen earlier, pulsating faintly under the grime. The symbols seemed to shift and change as if they were alive, whispering secrets of ancient times. "Look at this," she whispered, lifting the box carefully. Her voice trembled, betraying the unease that gnawed at her. The others gathered around, their curiosity piqued, despite the growing sense of dread. Tom examined it closely, noting the intricate mechanisms and the ancient craftsmanship. The gears and levers were unlike anything he had ever seen, each piece fitting together with a precision that defied the ages. "It's a puzzle box," he murmured, "but it's different, almost like it's alive." The box seemed to hum with a faint energy, responding to their touch with a life of its own. With trembling hands, they began to manipulate the box, each twist and turn accompanied by a soft, almost inaudible whisper. The whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. The murmurs grew louder, filling the room with an unsettling chorus of voices. The air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in on them, suffocating and oppressive. The temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath became visible, hanging in the air like ghostly apparitions. As the final piece clicked into place, a sudden, bone-chilling silence fell. The silence was so profound that it seemed to swallow all sound, leaving only the pounding of their hearts. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a deafening roar, the box sprang open, releasing a torrent of shadowy tendrils that filled the room with an inky, impenetrable darkness. The tendrils writhed and twisted, reaching out like the fingers of some malevolent entity. The whispers turned into agonized screams echoing through the void. The screams were filled with a pain and terror that seemed to pierce their very souls. A demonic presence, unseen but felt in every fiber of their beings, surged forth, its malevolent energy palpable. The air crackled with a dark energy, and the weight of the entity pressed down on them like a physical force. The room seemed to twist and warp, the walls closing in as the darkness enveloped them. Their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into complete blackness. The oppressive darkness was so complete that it felt as if they were being swallowed by the house itself. Heartbeats thundered in their chests, breaths came in ragged gasps, and the oppressive weight of the entity pressed down on them. The fear was so intense that it felt like a living thing, wrapping around them and squeezing the air from their lungs. They could feel its eyes, unseen yet burning with a malevolent intensity, watching, waiting. The sensation of being watched was so strong that it felt like a physical presence, a pair of eyes boring into their very souls. "Stay together!" Mark's voice broke through the terror, a beacon of determination amidst the chaos. His voice was steady, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. They huddled close, their only defense against the encroaching darkness. The house seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls whispering secrets of ancient evils and lost souls. The whispers were filled with a malevolence that seemed to seep into their very bones. The demonic presence lingered, a constant reminder of the horrors that awaited them. It was a dark, oppressive force that seemed to feed on their fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. They had unleashed something far beyond their comprehension, and there was no turning back. The true nightmare was only beginning to unfold. The realization hit them like a physical blow, leaving them shaken but resolute. Oz 3S. As the darkness slowly receded, they noticed a brass handle on a door they hadn't seen before. With a collective breath, they opened the door and stepped into a new room, their resolve unbroken, but their souls forever marked by the darkness they had unleashed. The puzzle box lay empty at their feet, a silent testament to the malevolent force they had awakened. With a collective breath, they pressed on, deeper into the heart of Black Hollow, their resolve unbroken, but their souls forever marked by the darkness they had unleashed. The house seemed to watch them, its walls whispering promises of the horrors yet to come. Pause 3, cess. Just as Mark's hand lingered on the cold brass door handle, a sudden rustling echoed through the darkened hallway like the whisper of ancient secrets. The group turned sharply, hearts pounding in their chests, their breaths visible in the chilling air. Emerging from the shadows, a figure cloaked in tattered robes stepped forward, the fabric whispering against the floor. His face, obscured by the hood, remained hidden in the depths of darkness. Only his eyes, glinting with a mix of fear and urgency, were visible, like twin beacons in the night. The air seemed to grow colder, the oppressive silence broken by his gravelly voice, which carried the weight of countless untold stories. "Turn back now," he warned, his tone a blend of desperation and authority, each word dripping with a sense of impending doom. "This place, it consumes those who dare to uncover its secrets." I've seen what lies within these walls. I've seen the darkness that dwells here, lurking in every shadow, waiting to claim its next victim. His words hung heavy in the air, each one imbued with the weight of experience and terror, like a dark cloud settling over them. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the stranger's presence unsettling them, even more than the house itself. He continued, his voice trembling slightly as he recounted the horrors he had witnessed, his eyes reflecting the haunted memories. "Black Hollow is cursed," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath, as if the very walls were listening. "I've seen friends lost to its depths, their souls trapped, their screams echoing through the void, a symphony of despair. Malphas is but one of many evils here. There are things far worse, things that cannot be unseen or undone, horrors that twist the mind and shatter the soul." The stranger's eyes bore into each of them, a silent plea for them to heed his warning, the intensity of his gaze like a physical force. But despite the fear gnawing at their insides, a steely resolve began to form. They had come too far to turn back now. The answers they sought were within reach, just beyond that heavy wooden door, which seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "We appreciate the warning," Mark replied, his voice steady yet strained, each word a testament to their determination. "But we have to see this through. We have to know the truth, no matter the cost." The stranger sighed, a sound filled with resignation and sorrow, as if he had seen this resolve before and knew its likely end. "Then may whatever gods you believe in have mercy on your souls," he muttered before retreating back into the shadows, his form dissolving into the darkness, leaving the group to face the unknown. With a shared look of determination, they turned back to the door. The path was set and there was no turning back. The air crackled with tension like the calm before a storm as they prepared to step into the heart of Black Hollow. Pause 3S. The door creaked open, the sound echoing like a death knell, and they crossed the threshold, leaving the stranger's warning behind. Little did they know the true horrors were only beginning to reveal themselves, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be unleashed. Tom, unaware of his true identity, was both the stranger and himself, reborn in an endless cycle of torment to play both roles, each death a manifestation of their deepest fears. Deeper they ventured, each room an echo of forgotten horrors. The walls seemed to close in, whispering secrets of the past, secrets that were better left buried. Every step they took echoed with the memories of those who had walked these halls before them, never to return. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floorboards creaked under their weight, as if groaning in protest. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, whispering their name. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, reaching out with tendrils of fear, trying to pull them into the abyss. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling their minds with dread. The temperature dropped noticeably, their breath visible in the cold air. A sudden gust of icy wind extinguished their only light, plunging them into absolute darkness. Panic swelled, then a faint glow. Their breaths came in short, ragged gasps as they tried to steady themselves, the cold seeping into their bones. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water, a pale, ethereal light emanating from under a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. It was a beacon in the darkness calling to them, promising answers or perhaps more questions. The door was adorned with strange, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Drawn by an unseen force, they approached, each heartbeat pounding against the silence. The air was thick with anticipation, every step bringing them closer to the unknown. The floor beneath them felt uneven, as if it was shifting with each step. The air grew frigid, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into their souls. It was as if the very essence of the place was trying to freeze them in their tracks, to stop them from uncovering its secrets. The mist swirled around their feet, adding to the eerie atmosphere.
With urgency. "Let's go in. We can't turn back now." The urgency in their voice was palpable, driven by a mix of fear and determination.
Mark, emboldened by a strange sense of urgency, pushed the door open. The weight of the door seemed to resist, as if it was guarding the secrets within. The hinges creaked loudly, echoing through the hallway. The room pulsed with an unnatural light. It was a light that seemed to have a life of its own, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. The walls were covered in ancient runes, glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center, a pentagram etched into the floor glowed an eerie crimson. The lines of the symbol seemed to pulse with energy, drawing their eyes to its center. The air around it crackled with a strange electric energy, and within its confines a figure formed, wreathed in shadows and power. It was a presence that commanded attention, exuding an aura of menace. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist around it as if alive. Malphas, the demon of Black Hollow. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. His form was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a dark aura radiating from him. In the corner, an ancient puzzle box lay, its intricate design almost hypnotic. The air around it seemed to shimmer with a strange energy. The box was covered in strange symbols and runes, each one more intricate than the last. As they reached for it, a sense of foreboding washed over them. The box seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it was waiting for someone to solve it. The air grew heavy and a low hum filled the room. With trembling hands, they began to manipulate the box, each movement unlocking a new piece of the puzzle. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Each click of the box echoed loudly, adding to the tension. But as the final piece clicked into place, a horrifying realization dawned. They were caught in a time loop, a never-ending cycle they could never change. The room, the whispers, the darkness, it would all repeat, trapping them in an eternal nightmare. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew colder.
With urgency, stop, you must not proceed. The chamber is cursed. The figure's voice was filled with desperation, a final plea to save them.
But their determination blinded them to the warnings. They pressed on, driven by a need to uncover the truth. The air grew heavier and the sense of dread intensified.
Desperately, turn back now, it's not too late. The figure's voice was filled with a mix of fear and urgency, a final attempt to save them.
The stranger's warnings fell on deaf ears. They were too close to turn back now. The air grew colder and the sense of dread became almost unbearable.
With despair, you have sealed your fate. The figure's voice was filled with despair, a final haunting warning.
And with that final warning, the stranger vanished, leaving them to face the horrors of the Chamber of Malphas alone. The air grew colder, and the sense of dread became almost unbearable. A guttural growl ripped through the silence, shaking the very foundations of the house, sending shivers down the spine of anyone within earshot. The figure within the pentagram solidified, its form becoming more distinct with each passing second. Malphas, the harbinger of nightmares. His eyes, burning embers of hate, locked onto Mark, piercing through the darkness with an intensity that could melt steel.
A low, menacing chuckle echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls and amplifying the terror in Mark's heart.
A terrifying grin stretched across his face, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that glistened with a malevolent sheen. Fear, raw and primal, seized Mark, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. He wanted to run, to scream, but his body refused to obey, as if paralyzed by an unseen force. He was frozen, trapped in the demon's gaze, his mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief.
The sound of his own heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out all other noise.
Then, with a speed that defied comprehension, Malphas lunged, his movements a blur of darkness and malevolence. Mark could only watch in horror as the demon's claws, dripping with an ethereal fire that seemed to burn with the souls of the damned, plunged towards him. A scream died in his throat as darkness consumed him, his last thought, a fleeting moment of regret for all the choices that led him here. Pause 3S. Mark's scream, frozen in his throat, finally erupted, a blood-curdling wail that echoed through the cursed halls. Malphas, now fully materialized, relished the sound, his eyes glinting with sadistic pleasure. The demon's claws, dripping with the ethereal fire of the damned, hovered inches from Mark's chest, the heat searing his flesh even without contact. Pause 2S. With deliberate slowness, Malphas dragged a claw down Mark's torso, the razor-sharp talons slicing through skin and muscle with sickening ease. Mark's scream grew louder, more desperate, as pain unlike anything he had ever known consumed him. The air filled with the coppery scent of blood mingled with the sulphurous stench of the demon. Pause 2. Malphas's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound that carried the weight of countless tormented souls. He twisted his claw, causing Mark's body to convulse in agony, each movement sending fresh waves of torment through his veins. The demon's eyes never left Mark's, savoring every flicker of pain, every tear that spilled from his eyes. Pause 2S. Mark's vision blurred, the edges of his world darkening as blood loss and pain began to take their toll. But Malphas was not done. With a swift, brutal motion, he plunged his claw into Mark's chest, the ethereal fire burning through flesh and bone. Pause 3S. Mark's scream reached a fever pitch, a sound that would haunt the memories of those who heard it. As the life drained from him, Mark's final thoughts were a chaotic jumble of regret and pain. The demon's face was the last thing he saw, a grinning visage of pure evil, before darkness claimed him. Pause 3S. His body fell limp, a lifeless husk as Malphas released him, the demon's laughter still echoing in the chamber. The house grew silent once more, the echoes of Mark's agony lingering in the air like a dark stain. Malphas turned his attention to the remaining intruders, his eyes promising more pain, more suffering. The nightmare was far from over. Pause 3S. Emily's scream, a piercing wail of pure terror, shattered the oppressive silence. Her body convulsed as unseen forces lifted her from the ground, suspending her in mid-air. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pulsating with dark energy. Malphas, his eyes glowing with malevolent glee, extended his claws, the tips crackling with dark fire. Pause 2S. He began to weave intricate patterns in the air, each movement sending tendrils of shadow to wrap around Emily, constricting her with an icy grip. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle against the tightening bonds. The shadows seeped into her skin, a chilling sensation that spread through her veins, turning her blood to ice. Pause 2S. Emily's eyes widened in horror as her body began to twist and contort, her bones snapping and realigning with sickening cracks. Her screams grew louder, more desperate, as the pain became unbearable. Malphas's laughter, a sound that echoed with the torment of countless souls, filled the room, drowning out her cries. Pause 2S. He reached out, his clawed hand hovering inches from her face. With a cruel smile, he plunged his claws into her forehead, the dark fire burning through her flesh and bone. Emily's mind exploded with agony, her thoughts fragmented into a chaotic whirlwind of pain and fear. Pause 3S. The shadows around her tightened their grip, crushing her ribs and squeezing the life from her lungs. Emily's vision blurred, the edges of her world darkening as the shadows consumed her. Her final thoughts were a jumbled mess of regret and terror. Her last sight, the grinning face of Malphas. Pause 3S. As her life ebbed away, Emily's body fell limp, a lifeless husk suspended in the air. Malphas released her, letting her body crumple to the ground in a heap. The room grew silent once more, the echoes of her agony lingering in the air like a dark stain. Malphas turned his gaze to the remaining intruders, his eyes promising more pain, more suffering. The nightmare was far from over. Pause 3S. Lisa, paralyzed by the sight of Emily's lifeless body, felt her heart pound against her ribs. The cold, clammy air weighed heavily on her, each breath a struggle. She took a hesitant step backward, her eyes darting around the room for any means of escape. But Malphas had already shifted his focus to her, his eyes gleaming with the promise of new suffering. Pause 2S. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, slithering along the floor and walls, converging around Lisa. She could feel their cold touch creeping up her legs, binding her in place. Her muscles tensed, a scream building in her throat, but no sound escaped. Malphas extended a clawed hand, and with a flick of his wrist, Lisa was yanked off her feet, suspended in midair. Pause 2S. The room's temperature dropped sharply, frost forming intricate patterns on the walls and floor. Lisa's skin prickled with the biting cold, her breath visible in the frigid air. Malphas's laughter filled the room, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. He began to chant in an ancient, guttural language, each word sending ripples of dark energy coursing through Lisa's body. Pause 2S. Her limbs twisted and contorted unnaturally, her joints popping and cracking under the strain. The pain was excruciating, her nerves aflame with agony. Lisa's vision blurred as tears streamed down her face, her mind struggling to hold on to any semblance of sanity. The shadows tightened their grip around her, squeezing her chest, making it impossible to breathe. Pause 2S. Malphas's chant grew louder, more intense, and the shadows responded, their icy tendrils piercing Lisa's skin, burrowing deep into her flesh. She could feel them writhing beneath her skin, a sickening sensation that made her want to claw at herself, to rip them out. But she was helpless, a puppet in Malphas's sadistic game. Pause 2S. Her screams finally broke free, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the room. Malphas's eyes glowed brighter, feeding off her pain, his smile widening with each cry. He raised his hand and the shadows surged, tearing through Lisa's body with brutal force. Her bones shattered, her organs ruptured, blood pouring from her mouth in a frothy torrent. Pause 2S. The torment seemed to stretch on for an eternity, each moment filled with unimaginable pain. Lisa's mind fractured under the strain, her thoughts dissolving into a chaotic swirl of agony and terror. As her body finally gave out, the shadows released her, letting her crumple to the ground in a broken, bloodied heap. Pause 3S. Malphus stood over her, his laughter echoing in the now silent room. Lisa's lifeless eyes stared blankly ahead, her face a mask of horror. The room's oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift, but the echoes of her suffering lingered, a haunting reminder of the demon's power. Malphus turned his gaze to the remaining intruders, his eyes promising even more pain, more suffering. The nightmare was far from over. Voiceover. Pause 3S. Tom, the last of the intruders, stood paralyzed with fear as the echoes of Lisa's torment still hung in the air. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a deafening drum that drowned out all rational thought. He knew it was only a matter of time before Malphus turned his attention to him. Pause 2S. The demon's eyes, gleaming with malevolent intent, locked onto Tom. Malphus extended a clawed hand, and Tom felt an invisible force grip him, lifting him off the ground. He struggled, but it was futile. The dark energy held him in an unyielding vice. Pause 2S. The temperature in the room plummeted, the air growing so cold that Tom's breath came out in visible puffs. Frost began to creep along his skin, numbing him to the bone. Malphus's deep, guttural chant filled the room, each syllable a dagger of dark energy that pierced Tom's very soul. Pause 2S. His limbs were yanked in different directions, joints popping and muscles tearing. The pain was indescribable, a white-hot agony that seared through his nerves. His screams filled the room, a cacophony of despair that seemed to feed Malphus's dark power. Pause 2S. The shadows around him came alive, their icy tendrils snaking around his body, squeezing tighter and tighter. He could feel them burrowing into his flesh, a sensation so vile it made him want to tear his own skin off. Blood oozed from the wounds, staining the floor in dark, spreading pools. Pause 2 as Malphus's laughter grew louder, a chilling sound that resonated through the chamber. With a flick of his wrist, the shadows tightened their grip, crushing Tom's bones with a sickening crunch. His vision blurred, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. Pause 2S. The demon's chant reached a fever pitch, and the air around Tom crackled with dark energy. He felt his consciousness slipping away, his body a broken shell of what it once was. But Malphus wasn't done yet. The shadows surged one final time, tearing through Tom's body with brutal force. His screams turned into a gurgling choke as blood filled his mouth, spilling out in a frothy torrent. Pause 2S. The torment seemed to stretch on forever, each second an eternity of unimaginable pain. Tom's mind shattered, his thoughts dissolving into a chaotic swirl of agony and despair. As his body finally gave out, the shadows released him, letting him crumple to the ground in a broken, bloodied heap. Pause 3S. Malphus stood over him, his laughter echoing in the now silent room. Tom's lifeless eyes stared blankly ahead, his face a mask of horror. The room's oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift, but the echoes of his suffering lingered, a haunting reminder of the demon's power. Pause 2S. In that moment, Tom's final revelation struck him like a bolt of lightning. He was both the stranger and himself, reborn to play these roles in an endless cycle. The nightmare was far from over, and as Malphus turned his gaze to the remaining intruders, Tom knew that his torment was only beginning anew. Emily, her skepticism shattered by the horrifying spectacle, felt a primal terror grip her. The air crackled with energy, suffocating her, stealing the breath from her lungs. Her senses overloaded, bombarded by the stench of sulfur and decay, the guttural growls of the demon echoing through the cavernous room.
The shadows seemed to dance malevolently, twisting into grotesque shapes that mocked her fear.
Malphus, his eyes still burning with infernal fire, turned his gaze upon her. A cruel smile played on his lips, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth. He reached out, his clawed hand passing through Mark's fading form, leaving a trail of dark, smoky tendrils in its wake.
The air around them grew colder, the temperature plummeting as frost began to form on the edges of the room.
Emily wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. Her mind, her sanctuary, became his playground, invaded by visions of torment and despair.
Her thoughts were no longer her own, twisted into a nightmarish landscape where every corner held a new horror.
A scream trapped in her throat, a silent plea lost in the echoing laughter of Malphas. Her sanity shattered, leaving only a hollow shell, her eyes wide with unseeing terror.
The once familiar surroundings of the house now felt like a twisted maze, each step echoing with the promise of more horrors to come.
My God, what is happening to them? This is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The air is thick with an oppressive energy, and the walls seem to close in, suffocating us with dread. This can't be real, it can't be. How could such horrors exist in our world? The very fabric of reality seems to be tearing apart, revealing a nightmare realm beneath.
Lisa, her eyes wide with terror, watched as Malphas tormented her friends. The demon's laughter echoed through the room, a chilling sound that made her blood run cold. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and shadows danced menacingly in the corners. Her mind, unable to comprehend the horrors unfolding before her, clung to the last vestiges of sanity. She felt as if she were teetering on the edge of an abyss, about to fall into madness. The room spun around her, a vortex of fear and despair.
Please, let this be a nightmare. Just a nightmare. I want to wake up from this hellish dream. The cold sweat on my skin, the pounding of my heart. It all feels too real.
But the blood-curdling screams of her friends, the stench of fear and decay, the oppressive presence of the demon were all too real. Every sense was assaulted by the sheer terror of the moment. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur and decay, and the walls seemed to close in, trapping them in this nightmare. Malphas turned his gaze upon her, and a cold dread, unlike anything she had ever experienced, washed over her. It was as if the very essence of fear had taken physical form. His eyes glowed with an unholy light, piercing her soul and leaving her paralyzed with terror.
No, please. Spare me. I can't take this anymore. The weight of the fear is crushing, and I feel my sanity slipping away.
Her legs gave way and she crumpled to the ground, a whimper escaping her lips. The weight of her fear was too much to bear. The cold, hard floor offered no comfort, only a stark reminder of her helplessness. The demon advanced, his form flickering, his shadow stretching towards her like a living entity. It seemed to grow larger, more menacing with each step. The air around him crackled with dark energy, and the temperature dropped, chilling her to the bone. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of her impending doom. The sound of her own heartbeat echoed in her ears, a deafening drum of terror.
Please, someone help me. The words were barely a whisper, lost in the overwhelming darkness that surrounded her.
A strangled gasp. Silence. Lisa was gone. The room, once filled with terror, now stood eerily quiet, as if the very air mourned her loss. The oppressive silence was a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded, leaving an unsettling void in its wake.
So, this is it. The end. The culmination of everything we've been through. The final chapter in a story filled with darkness and despair. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the distant echoes of tormented souls.
Tom, the silent observer, had watched the horrors unfold with a detached fascination. He had seen the world crumble piece by piece, and yet he remained a mere spectator, untouched by the chaos around him. His eyes, once filled with life, now reflected the void of the abyss. He felt no fear, no terror, only a chilling curiosity. It was as if he was watching a play, a grotesque performance where he was both the audience and the unwitting participant. The grotesque scenes played out before him like a macabre ballet, each movement precise and deliberate.
What are you, really? A question that lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The words hung like a shroud, enveloping the space between them in a suffocating embrace.
He looked at Malphas not with horror but with a strange sense of recognition. It was as if he had always known this moment would come, as if he had been preparing for this encounter his entire life. The demon's eyes, burning with an otherworldly fire, mirrored the darkness within Tom's soul. The screams of his friends, the stench of death and decay washed over him, but he remained unmoved. The cacophony of suffering was just another layer of the surreal nightmare he found himself in. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows dancing to the rhythm of the anguished cries. He met the demon's gaze, his own eyes cold and empty. There was no fear, no anger, just a void where emotions should have been. The emptiness in his eyes was a stark contrast to the fiery intensity of Malphas's gaze.
I see you. I understand. Words that echoed in the silence, carrying a promise of something more, something darker. The demon's voice was a low, guttural whisper, resonating with an ancient power.
A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared darkness. It was a bond forged in the fires of despair, an unspoken agreement between two kindred spirits. The room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the air crackling with unspoken words. Malphas, momentarily surprised by the lack of fear in Tom's eyes, turned his full attention to him. It was rare to find a human so devoid of fear, so accepting of the darkness. The demon's interest was piqued, his curiosity ignited by Tom's unwavering gaze. A flicker of amusement danced in the demon's fiery gaze. It was as if he had found a worthy opponent, or perhaps a potential ally in the abyss. The flames reflected in his eyes seemed to dance with a life of their own, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He sensed a kindred spirit in the quiet observer, a soul already touched by the abyss. There was a familiarity in Tom's silence, a resonance that spoke of shared experiences and mutual understanding. The silence between them was heavy, laden with the weight of their shared darkness.
Join me. A whisper that was both an invitation and a command, a call to embrace the darkness fully. The words were a siren's call, beckoning Tom to step further into the abyss.
Malphas hissed, his voice a guttural rasp. It was a sound that promised power, but also demanded submission, a test of Tom's resolve and his willingness to step into the abyss. The hiss reverberated through the room, a chilling reminder of the power that lay within the darkness. But as Tom took a step forward, he felt a strange sensation, a sense of déjà vu. The scene around him began to blur, and he found himself back at the beginning, facing Malphas once more. It was as if he was caught in a loop, destined to relive this moment over and over. With each repetition, Tom felt himself changing, becoming less of who he was and more of a stranger. His memories began to fade, replaced by the dark whispers of the abyss. The transformation was slow but inevitable as he became one with the darkness. His eyes, once filled with curiosity, now mirrored the void. The loop had consumed him, and he had become the stranger, a silent observer of the endless night. The darkness had claimed him, and there was no escape from the eternal cycle. But now Tom had a new purpose. He became the stranger who warned his friends and those who dared to enter the house. His voice, once silent, now carried the weight of the abyss, a desperate plea to save others from his fate. Caught in a never-ending loop, Tom's warnings echoed through the halls, a haunting reminder of the nightmare that awaited. He was both the guardian and the prisoner, forever trapped in the House of Horrors. The house stood silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie calm. Inside, the echoes of screams and laughter lingered, trapped within the decaying walls, like ghosts of a forgotten past. The chamber, once filled with the presence of Malphas, stood empty. The pentagram still glowed faintly, its crimson light fading into the shadows, casting eerie patterns on the walls. The air hung heavy, thick with the stench of decay and the lingering essence of evil. The house had tasted fear, had fed on the terror of its victims, and it yearned for more, its very structure seeming to pulse with a malevolent hunger. Black Hollow House stood triumphant, its secrets buried deep within its rotten core. It had claimed its victims, leaving no trace, no evidence of the horrors that had transpired, as if the walls themselves had swallowed the terror whole. It awaited its next prey, its silence a siren song to the curious and the foolish. The evil remained, lurking in the shadows, ready to ensnare the unwary with its dark, silent invitation. The town below continued its existence, oblivious to the horrors that had transpired within the house on the hill. Or perhaps not oblivious, but accepting. The morning light cast long shadows, hinting at the darkness that lay beneath the surface. Black Hollow House was a part of their history, their legacy, a dark secret they collectively chose to ignore. Its windows, like hollow eyes, watched over the town, a silent guardian of their unspoken fears. Parents warned their children away from the house, their voices hushed, their eyes filled with a fear that spoke of more than just childhood tales. The warnings were laced with the weight of generations, each word a thread in the tapestry of their collective dread. The whispers continued, stories told and retold, each generation adding their own layer of dread and superstition. In dimly lit rooms, the air thick with the scent of old books and candle wax, the tales grew more elaborate, more terrifying. Black Hollow House remained, a monument to fear, a testament to the darkness that lurked at the edges of their reality. Its silhouette, shrouded in mist, stood as a grim reminder of the past that refused to be forgotten. The town lived alongside it in its shadow, forever bound to the secrets it held, to the horrors it had witnessed. And the silence continued. The silence of a town that had learned to live with its ghosts, to coexist with the darkness that lay just beyond the light. In the midst of this, Tom's fate was sealed. He was both the stranger and himself, reborn to play these roles in an endless cycle of torment. The town shadows whispered his name, binding him to the eternal night of Black Hollow.